How should Congress approach regulating children on social media? Jake Auchincloss is the member of Congress from Massachusetts' 4th District, and he joins the show today to talk about the Parents Over Platforms Act, which would give parents more tools to control what kids see online and on their smartphones. We talk about why he's concerned about kids on social media and what he calls digital dopamine, why he believes that age verification should be done at the operating system level, not by individual apps. And we talk about what his approach is with his own family, which has 3 young children. As always, thank you for listening to the New Liberal Podcast. Recommend us to a friend, throw a like, share on social media. All of that is greatly appreciated. And if you want to get more involved, the best way to do that is to become a member of the Center for New Liberalism. Go to cnliberalism.org/become a member. Join a local chapter today. Get involved. Thank you for listening to the podcast one more time, and enjoy the episode. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the New Liberal Podcast, part of the Center for New Liberalism. I'm your host, Jeremiah Johnson. Joining me today from Massachusetts' 4th District is Congressman Jake Auchincloss. Congressman, welcome to the show.
Appreciate you having me on.
So we're going to be talking today about the things that are happening online with kids and how we keep kids safe and the different approaches that, frankly, there's a lot of different bills floating around there. But in between the time that we've kind of talked about putting this podcast together, talking about this issue, and actually getting to record it, obviously there's been a lot going on in America. It is a turbulent time. So I wanted to ask you, just with everything that's going on in Minnesota, what are you hearing from your constituents? And obviously there's a lot of drama about what's going on in the House and the Senate. And, is there going to be funding for ICE? Should Secretary Noem be forced to resign? What are you hearing, and how do you think about this? Because obviously it's an immense tragedy that we're seeing unfold.
My constituents are more angry, more galvanized than at any point since January 6, 2021. Rightfully so, because this is the administration's most violent attack upon the rule of law since the president's attempt to steal a free and fair election. What Americans are seeing with their own eyes is a presidential paramilitary harass, sow fear, and kill immigrants and American citizens without regard to due process and without the professionalism fitting a free people. This administration is buckling under the public pressure, the political pressure, the legal pressure. And it is imperative for Democrats to strike at this moment. When the president is getting weaker, that is not a time for us to dust him off and get back to negotiating on other issues. It's a time to pounce.
It's been wild. I look at a lot of different stuff online. I track a lot of different things. It's part of what I do in terms of just trying to keep a wide net on what people are saying on social media. And I've never quite seen anything in the sense that, like, completely apolitical accounts, crochet Instagram accounts and NBA accounts on Twitter and, just people who never talk about politics are all saying, like, well, I never talk about this, but you guys, I'm not going to stay silent about this. And it probably, I think you're right, since January 6th, I've never seen this kind of people coming out of the woodwork everywhere.
Including also, Jeremiah, accounts and individuals who are deeply political, but also deeply aligned with the MAGA movement. I mean, you got to try real hard to be a Republican president and piss off the Gun Owners Association of America. And the incompetence and just extreme dereliction of duty in regards to the Constitution have even upset the Second Amendment advocates. And goodness knows I'm never on the same side as some of these groups. But truly, this president is creating a coalition opposed to his violation of the Bill of Rights on a number of different fronts. And what is imperative is that we actually deliver for Americans on this issue. Democrats were able to make healthcare front and center during the government shutdown. and point out to Americans, hey, prices are a problem. Here's our approach. Uh, it's a it is a part of what needs to be a comprehensive strategy, but this is the first step. And we were able to box Republicans into a corner in the House in voting for us, and now putting pressure on the Senate. We'll see if the Senate, folds or Senate gets something done. But it was an example of us making an issue front and center and then delivering something for Americans to see what Democrats are for, not just who we're against. Same thing's got to be done on immigration here. This has traditionally been the president's strongest issue. He has bankrupted whatever mandate he had with his lawless, reckless, dangerous behavior. And now Democrats need to demonstrate to the American public, hey, we know that many of you were upset about the lack of border security in the first 2 years of the Biden administration. Here's how Democrats can both secure the border and uphold the rule of law in law enforcement in the interior of the country.
It doesn't seem like it's that hard to me to just to be where normal people are on immigration. Apolitical normal people want a secure border. They want to know that there's not chaos at the border. And they certainly would want, if there are people committing crimes, people who came into the country illegally, who've committed crimes, it makes sense to target those people. But they also don't want, Maria who's cleaning hotel rooms, or Jose who's working on your roof and has never bothered anyone. They don't want them being, dragged in the street by masked thugs and, just this lawlessness, this trampling of rights. Like nobody seems to be in favor of that except the most deeply poisoned people, with extreme right wing politics, and even some of those people are jumping off. But it's just, I don't know.
So at the level of policy, it gets very complicated. And I don't want to say otherwise. I mean, you get into the minutia of visas and asylum standards and stuff. It is thorny. But at the level of principles, I think you're absolutely right. And the legislation in Congress right now that I think best embodies where that exhaustive majority of Americans are at is the Dignity Act. I was an original co-sponsor of Dignity last Congress. I'm again an original co-sponsor of Dignity this Congress. It was negotiated by two Latina congresswomen, actually, one a Republican from Florida, another a Democrat from Texas. And it tries to crystallize the principles that you're discussing. It's border security and infrastructure. It's a pathway to legal certainty for those individuals who are here in this country, paying back taxes, paying a fine, but contributing to their community and their economy. And it's streamlining and rationalizing our asylum and visa systems so that we can have the vitality of continued orderly legal immigration, and also then target, as you said, unauthorized immigrants who are a violent threat to public safety, not those who are trying to, build a new life here in this country.
Well, I do want to say thank you for, co-sponsoring that. And I know you're also someone who is ready to sign on the dotted line to impeach Secretary Kristi Noem, which I think is fully appropriate.
Yes.
But I do want to give us some time to talk about what we originally planned to talk about here today.
Yes.
It's very important what's going on in Minnesota. I'm glad we got a chance to talk for a few minutes, but there are hundreds of other things going on in America at any given time, right? And we also have to focus on those. And one of the conversations, and one of the other things you're sponsoring in Congress, is a conversation and a bill about what we should do with kids and social media and the internet. And to step back from any particular piece of legislation for a moment, this has been like a big national conversation for the last few years. Like, what is the appropriate role of screen time for kids, social media apps and smartphones for kids? And I'll ask you kind of a general question, in the wake of people reading Jonathan Haidt and the anxious generation and everybody having this big national conversation, how do you think about the big picture issue? What do you worry about when you think about kids in America and the internet and social media? What parts of that are concerning to you?
Yes. So it's personal to me. I am one of the youngest parents in the Democratic caucus in Congress, period. I got a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old at home. So the way I see it is I got 3 to 5 years before they're after me for that first smartphone with social media apps.
So you get a lot of sleep at night, is what you're saying.
So, as a parent, I feel overpowered by these trillion-dollar social media corporations that are attention fracking our children. But as a member of the jurisdiction, the committee with jurisdiction, I don't feel powerless. I feel like I got to pick up that gavel and go to battle. And that's what I'm doing. I've led legislation, most of which is bipartisan, to go after these social media firms. And the vein of effort that I'm pursuing is one that really prioritizes public health. And I think this is an important distinction, Jeremiah, that is at the meta level here. No pun intended. There is one approach to social media corporations that's about the political economy of social media corporations. It asks questions like antitrust questions. Is there too much market concentration? It asks questions a lot about speech issues and First Amendment violations. It asks questions about preemption, state or federal. These are important questions. I think they are actually the wrong frame, though, for tackling what is, to me, a public health question, which is social media good for the developing brain or not? Right? Like, imagine trying to do tobacco regulation 70 years ago without first determining, is nicotine and tobacco good or not good for you? Same thing with trying to do alcohol regulation without determining, is alcohol good for you or not? And to what extent is it good for the developing brain? We're seeing this with cannabis right now. And to me, the primal question needs to be, is screen time, and particularly is digital dopamine, which is when companies try to stimulate the ventral striatum, which is the dopamine reinforcement system of the developing brain, via software, whether through online gambling or pornography or social media clicks, is that healthy for the developing brain? My view, and I think the preponderance of evidence is on my side, is no. I think there's a lot of common sense that goes into that. I think there's also some strong evidence that Jonathan Haidt has chronicled. And if we just make that basic statement, I don't think this is good for the developing brain, I think that actually clarifies how we have to approach this, because then it becomes a temperance movement. Then it becomes, hey, like Meta, I don't care about the antitrust questions of whether or not you're allowed to buy Instagram, or Google, I don't care about the antitrust questions about whether you're allowed to buy Bing or not. What I care about is, are you trying to addict my children to your product? And if so, I have a problem with that, and we're going to regulate that as a vice, as a part of a temperance movement. And that's what my legislation does. And it also, Jeremiah, builds an interesting coalition, because now you can build allies with center-right advocacy and institutions who also have concerns about the effects on the developing brain, even though they may not agree on some of the speech questions.
Yeah, this is one of those things that thankfully has not become polarized yet. Like, give it a few years, who knows? But right now, it seems like there's a cross-coalitional concern about, is the internet writ large good for developing brains, and especially social media apps? There's other things people worry about the internet, but I don't think anybody's really that concerned about, is your 7-year-old reading Wikipedia? It's mostly, is it bad for them to be on these kind of gigantic social media apps? Is screen time going to have a negative effect on their health, on
Yes.
their social development? And you've introduced a bill called the Parents Over Platforms Act.
Yes.
And there's a lot of bills floating around right now. There's the Kids Online Safety Act. There's like the APAA, which I have it in my notes, but there's something. I've looked at like 6 or 7 of these things that exist. Everybody seems to have their own version. What specifically would your bill do, the Parents Over Platforms Act, and what makes it different from other approaches here?
Parents Over Platforms Act is a way to empower parents to send an age verification signal from their children's phones, such that all the apps their children use have to create an age-appropriate experience. And if they don't, they are liable for that in a court of law. What this does basically is it creates an enforceable age of internet adulthood in America. This is one of the big mistakes that Congress made through the Telecoms Act back in the 1990s, and has since doubled down on, is we have an age of adulthood for the real world, for when you can drink alcohol, for when you can drive a car, for when you can, go to the playground by yourself, right? And we recognize that, hey, there's opportunities and there's risks, and we try to balance those two things, and we kind of create an age where we think it's appropriate. That just doesn't exist online. There's just no sense of it. It is nominally 13 years old, but it's totally unenforceable and thereby has become meaningless. No age of internet adulthood. So we have allowed children to go out into this digital realm where they're spending 6 to 10 hours a day and be treated like adults when they're 9 and 10 years old. That has led to, of course, horrific examples of sex trafficking and cyber stalking and sexual assault, but also more pedestrian problems of attention fragmentation and just generally deterioration of mental health. Now, simultaneously, as we've done that to kids online, I think we've developed too much of a safetyism culture in the real world, so that now kids are spending less time outdoors than a typical federal inmate every day.
And this is the part of Jonathan Haidt's book that I think everybody ignores, is that
100%.
it's not, as you said, it's not just that we're giving them unlimited freedom on the internet and social media to see the worst of the worst, whatever they can
Yes.
stumble upon, but that there was one poll that always just shocks me, that like they asked parents what age is appropriate for a kid to play in the front yard. Like the parent is at home and the kid can play in the front yard without supervision, and the median age was like 10 or 11 years old. And I like, just and for me, when I grew up, I'm thinking that's crazy. I was running around getting into so much trouble when I was 10 or 11 years old.
And those, kids are anti-fragile, right? And you want them to make those small mistakes as they're younger, and it makes them more resilient as they get older, and become learning as they learn from it. So we know this. What my bill does is it's very simply basically says, hey, whether you have an Android or an iOS phone that you're buying for your kid, you set up a family account, and then you can say, hey, are they 13 or younger? Are they 16 or younger? Are they 18 or younger? It's an anonymous binary age verification signal. And then it's set and forget. That's, you do it once, just like when you're setting up the phone family account. Every single app that creates an age differentiated experience, gambling, social media, has to respect that age signal, or else they get sued. So this is both simple, it's enforceable, and it empowers parents to just then trust, hey, I don't know what update TikTok is doing today or what Instagram is doing tomorrow, but I do know that they have to respect the age signal that they're getting and create that appropriate age experience. Now, this bill by itself is not the end all be all, of course. We have a lot more work to do, but it is basically the infrastructure for age appropriate experiences online.
And this would be happening at the level of the phone itself or of the app store. Why that approach rather than, having individual apps kind of check what they need to check?
That's right. What the parent is doing is basically empowering the firmware layer, the iOS or Android layer, to be sort of the parental delegate. The same way that you empower, Apple to be your payment services delegate when you put your credit card in there and you pay for stuff with your phone. You're basically empowering that firmware layer to be the age verification delegate. Now, why does that make more sense? It's a great question. And in fact, the competing bill that I'm up against, that my bill is up against, my bill is bipartisan. I'm up against the partisan Republican-only bill, does what you're saying. Every single app does it. So here's the experience that creates. Your kid wants to download a weather app. Fine, like who cares?
Your kid's just crazy about the weather.
Yeah, want to know the weather. Kid has to verify their age with that app itself. Maybe they scan a license if they're old enough. Maybe they do a face scan. So that weather app now has their face, has their license. You've got to do the same thing. You've got to verify that you're their parent. And then every time the app updates, both parties, both you and your child, have to do that stuff again. Now, that's true for the weather app, which you don't really care. It's not an age differentiated experience. They can use it. It's also true for social media app. If that sounds like unworkable and kind of ridiculous, that's the whole point. This bill was drafted by Meta's lawyers, and they drafted it this way for two reasons. One is that they knew it was unconstitutional and it was going to get thrown out. You can't do that level of intrusive age verification across all app experiences. And indeed, a Texas judge for the state level version of this bill just tossed it out as unconstitutional. So Meta knew what they were doing. They were like, hey, we're going to demoralize and distract and disorient these tech reform people with a bill that just won't work. Number two, Meta was like, hey, in some alternative universe, even if this thing does become law, parents are going to throw up their hands and be like, this is the most unworkable, ridiculous system I've ever seen. I have no interest in doing any of this. And then Meta still wins. So it's a very sophisticated false flag operation. Unfortunately, it's gotten some traction with Republicans, but now the tide is turning because people are waking up to it. And my bipartisan bill, I think, is going to be the flagship approach.
It seems like this is a common tactic that the largest company in a given space is more than happy to have a really burdensome kind of regulation, because it means that, small competitors are just going to be driven out of business entirely. Like, one of the things I worry about with any bill that approaches this is, for a small app maker, are they going to be able to implement this and survive this, or is this going to create a huge
Yeah,
burden for, because apps, they seem frivolous. Some people still think like it's 2014 and apps are just little games and they don't mean anything, but these are often small businesses that people own that are their
yeah,
livelihoods, and it's another form of regulation on small business. And I don't think we should be regulating small businesses more strictly, than large businesses, I guess.
that's right. I mean, Meta loves the idea of endless litigation on constitutional questions. They love the idea of exhaustive, unworkable, not so much regulation necessarily on their operations, but almost like intrafamilial regulation, like what the parent and the kid have to like. All of this mess that makes it really hard to just have new experiences generally is going to benefit the incumbent, where they have already a lot of stickiness on the home screen. Um, and I agree with you about not wanting to impair small businesses. If you're developing a new calculator app, if you're doing anything that's sort of to the general population, this doesn't even not even relevant to you, my bill. If you're doing something that has age differential experiences, you do what you're still doing, which is to have an experience for youth and have an experience for adults. But just know now with my bill that if you don't adhere, if you don't actually follow through on what you're claiming to parents you're doing, you're going to get sued.
Now, as I said, there have been many versions of this kind of a bill in the past. There's competing ones right now. There have been past attempts at things like this. And I've often worried that, these bills can be more intrusive than people realize. That this, as you said, one of the potential dangers is that companies are going to end up with databases full of pictures of our children because they tried to age verify, or that, people's driver's licenses or social security numbers are going to be in some database somewhere, and everything always eventually gets hacked. And that, this does present some kind of speech issue. I think of like the Kids Online Safety Act as something that potentially went way overboard in terms of, maybe it had a noble goal, but would just create all kinds of downstream effects. When you think about this, how do you balance between, you want kids to be safe online, you want parents to have the ability to control what their kids are seeing in an easy way that's, actually able to be implemented, and then the other side is that, well, the internet can actually be really good. It's a great place for building community.
Yeah.
It's a great place to learn. Kids are going to have, digital literacy is important. They're going to need these tools as they grow up. How do you balance between like the good that can come out of the internet and the need to keep kids safe without kind of going overboard? How do you find that balance?
Totally. And this is why I think the frame of public health is so much more productive than the frame of political economy. The frame of political economy, you end up talking about like neo-Brandishian antitrust questions about market share. You end up talking about which state attorney general is going to sue for which kind of politically charged content on which side of the question. And again, those are issues you have to grapple with. I mean, you're not freed from tackling them, but they're not actually the farthest upstream question. The farthest upstream questions are public health questions about, is this thing good for us as a society, as individuals? In what ways is it good? In what ways is it not so good? And once we kind of have some consensus about that, you want laws and norms to be mutually reinforcing, right? Law is not going to do all of this. It's not going to be a temperance movement unto itself. Norms are not going to be a temperance movement unto themselves, particularly when the network effects are so strong, and thereby you do need some legal action to unwind them. You need laws and norms to be mutually reinforcing. Jonathan Haidt has done a huge service by establishing some of these norms, I think, more in public discourse. Now we need Congress to establish some of these laws. And I think alcohol is not a crazy analogy to use here. Alcohol, like social media, it's a social lubricant. It can enliven social experiences. It's fun. Don't want to do it too much.
People have been drinking alcohol for thousands of years, and they will
Yeah,
for as long as we're around. Yeah.
people like alcohol. I think there's an appropriate amount of public policy that says, hey, not too much, not while you're driving, not while you're working, not if you're a kid, but otherwise we want to sort of let people make their own choices. And I think we have to have that same conversation about digital dopamine, which is really what these social media firms are in the business of selling. They are frankly closer to pharmaceutical companies than they are to communications companies. They are selling digital dopamine to people. And I think there's a role for us to say, hey, uh, not while you're driving, not while you're working. Uh, Maybe not so great for kids, but for adults, like we're not really going to lecture you on what to do. We want to inform you about the effects of it. But for kids, we're going to have a strong point of view because of the developing brain and because of how sensitive the ventral striatum is. Um, and when you take that lens of it, I think you start to see the legislation that makes sense about age verification, um, about really trying to put parents in the driver's seat, and also about what do people trust in this whole online realm? Where does trust lie? I don't think trust lies at the app level. I don't think people trust the Meta app. I don't think people trust the Instagram app. People may enjoy them. I don't think they trust them. I do think people have trust at the firmware layer. I think people fundamentally actually do have some trust in their actual iOS firmware system or in their Android system. People put their credit cards in there. People store their most sensitive family photos in there.
They unlock it with a fingerprint, so they must trust it with their
They unlock it with their fingerprint and their
biometrics.
face.
Yeah.
100%. So I think the revealed preferences are showing that people actually do put some trust in Android and iOS. And so it's appropriate to make them sort of delegated authorities on age verification.
Well, so walk me through what this would look like for parents. If we're not making them, every single app that the kid wants, you've got to redo this thing over and over. You're going to do it once at the firmware level. But how would that work? How would verification even work for a kid who, obviously might not even have government documents, like other than a birth certificate in a file somewhere?
They don't need them. And this is really what I mean when I say the law and norms have to reinforce each other. If you're a parent and you want to set an age signal that's inaccurate for your kid, your congressman can't stop you under this law. You do it. That has to be something that you believe as a parent, and that's where norms come in. That's where either you believe Jonathan Haidt or you don't. You're the parent. I think ultimately we need to respect that decision from a parent. But if you do, as a parent, think that, hey, I don't want my 13-year-old to have just an open-ended experience on TikTok. What my bill does, one, it makes it super easy. You just set the age signal when they first get the phone or whenever, actually, and then you forget about it. You never have to think about it again. And two, what it does is it says to TikTok's general counsel, to their chair of their board of directors, to their CEO, we're going to haul your ass in court. I mean, if you have spent, these social media firms have spent 20 years trying to avoid liability under Section 230 for everything. It's one of their key strengths of these corporations. And it's saying, you will be sued.
And this would be in the case of if there's something that the parent wants an age-gated experience and the app says that they're offering that,
Yep.
but then they don't respect the signal that the kind of the firmware is giving them. That's when they're going to run into problems.
Exactly. And these social media companies do claim to provide a differentiated experience. They claim to provide one that's different for 13 and under than for 13 and above. Now, I think that should be 16. Like, that's another bill that we got to work on. And maybe that can be an example of where public pressure actually causes them to change. And you may see some of these billboards, but Instagram and TikTok are advertising this way, where they're trying to claim to parents that, oh, we're creating this differentiated experience for your teens that protects them online. I would say don't trust them. I think they're, in a lot of ways, I think they're being very disingenuous. My bill would put some teeth behind those billboards and actually hold them accountable for it. Not just social media, by the way. Same thing is true for a gambling app, right? If you download a gambling app as a kid, couldn't access it if your age verification signal had been sent at 13 and your child tried to download an online gambling app, the gambling app would be liable for not allowing that account to be created.
Mm-hmm. The big thing that honestly I think a lot of people would not immediately think of is Roblox, which has every 9-year-old in the country is on Roblox, and it's unfathomable to me how big Roblox is. But
Yep.
more people play Roblox than own PS5s and Xboxes and Nintendos put together. It's unfathomable. So even video games, I'm assuming, would be part of this. But let me take it out of the abstract. We're talking about kind of big abstract policy questions and social movements and societal norms. And as you said, you are one of the youngest parents in Congress. You have 3 kids, 5 or under. They're still young, so you probably haven't had to think too hard about this yet. But I'm curious, when you and your wife talk, what is your approach going to be when your kids start asking for more screen time, they want to own an iPad, they want to own a phone, because you're not too many years away from when your
No.
oldest might start asking for this stuff. And on a personal level, how do you guys think about just screen time and apps and what you think is healthy for your kids?
One, I try to set a better example myself. Like every, working parent, I'm on my phone too much in the house, right? I'm looking at my messages or my email or whatever, and you feel so productive, and then you look up and you're like, I'm just like, all I've been doing is sitting there typing stuff out with my thumbs. So I'm trying to set a better example, and I got a brick for Christmas where you can brick your phone and put it away. And so I'm trying to do that myself and just show my kids that when I'm with them, I'm with them. Uh, and then I generally subscribe to the Jonathan Haidt set of recommendations. I think you want to wait until eighth grade to get a smartphone. You want to wait until 16 to set up a social media account for kids, maybe even 18. What's key to me, and what I'm hoping to help cultivate, is you want to get other parents on board with you, right? Because the FOMO effect is very strong, right? These are network effect businesses, and so much easier if your kids' 10 friends also are not getting smartphones until eighth grade. And I'm glad to see that there are these movements now blossoming, the wait until eighth and others, to try to create some counter network effects in the other direction. I think that's very promising. Another example of where norms and laws need to be reinforcing each other, right? No, not one is going to do it on its own. They have to be mutually reinforcing.
When we think about the other direction, like it's I'm kind of in agreement with a lot of the things that you're saying. Like you've sold
Yeah.
me. I think that it's generally good that the wait till eighth movement. I hope it picks up steam. I think that it's an unfortunate thing. I don't want to put blame on any particular parent because parenting is hard. But it's unfortunate when you see kind of the iPad zombie kids and you know that they're watching the iPad 6 hours, 7 hours a day, and it's just you wish there was a better way. But when you think about that in the other direction, that there are kids who are going to be having way too much screen time, exposure to these apps, what part of that you've called it digital dopamine, but like what are the effects of that worry you the most? That you think
Yeah.
we're going to see increased anxiety and mental illness, or do you worry about political polarization? Do you just worry about brain development and academic achievement? Like, what do you think kind of the downstream effects are if we don't,
Yeah.
if we kind of let's say we did nothing and we just let this run like a runaway train? What would you be worried about?
A few things. And I think we should start this conversation by being candid that we don't know, actually. We don't fully know the effects of digital dopamine on the developing brain, which is why, and I've called for this in a number of different outlets, I think we need the consumer protection, the uh, Consumer Safety Bureau, Consumer Safety Protection Bureau, to work with the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Mathematics to compel the social media firms to share data on usage, and then to do actually randomized controlled trials on the effects of digital dopamine on the developing brain. We do studies on the effects of every other kind of pharmaceutical intervention to make sure it's safe for humans. Digital dopamine is an intervention like that, and it should be studied. And the data exists. What we don't have is trust and auditing, and independent scientists with access to it to tell parents what actually matters and then to promulgate guidelines. So first, we got to do the research. But I do think we have some pretty strong intuition about what's happening here. And what's fundamentally happening is dopamine is a 600 million year old circuit. It's been around since humans were nematodes. And it's reinforcing the expectation of pleasure. It's not actually pleasure itself. That's critical. Serotonin is pleasure itself. Dopamine is the expectation of pleasure. And so, wondering, hey, did I get a lot of clicks and likes on this social media post? Gambling, am I going to get the? Am I going to hit on this gamble I'm taking? Those excite the dopamine system. What we know about the developing brain is that dopamine circuitry, which is housed in the ventral striatum, is very sensitive. It's really, really risk seeking because it really is excited by stimulation. And it's paired with a pretty immature prefrontal cortex that does judgment and decision making. This should surprise no parent or anybody who's ever met a teenager, right? You're like, yeah, that sounds about right. It's like risk taking behavior paired with some underdeveloped judgment. Makes sense. So, what we're doing is we're empowering these corporations to frack those neural systems for their own benefit, for their own revenue. Do I know exactly what that's going to mean for the developing brain? No, but like it's probably not a great idea, right? And I think we're seeing some pretty strong evidence that mental health has plummeted, and this may be even more concerning, that attention has fragmented. Attention is the most valuable currency that we all have in this era of nonstop noise. And what's happening to our children is they're having a harder and harder time paying attention. And that term paying attention is critical. You pay it, and the social media firms are buying it.
Attention is the one thing that no matter how much money you have, you can't get more attention. You have a certain amount of minutes in the day and a certain amount of attention in your brain. And, I think that's completely right. Chris Hayes wrote a great book about this called The
Yes.
Siren's Call. The point about gambling is really interesting because gambling is everywhere now. If you watch sports, you can't get away from DraftKings and FanDuel and, but it even beyond just the actual gambling apps, it seems like everything is becoming gambling. Finance has turned into, investing has turned into gambling because now everybody wants to buy meme stocks and engage in crypto coins and it's essentially a legalized form of gambling. And you can open up Robinhood and YOLO out some options, that frankly have the regular consumer has no place betting on the share price of Tesla in the next week. And even video games, loot boxes in video games are a pure gambling mechanic that it's very addictive for kids and for teenagers. And it's something that worries me. And I have genuinely pretty libertarian instincts about most
Yep.
things, but I look at that and even though I'm fairly libertarian, fairly live and let live, I look at that and I'm like, that doesn't feel like it's a great thing for society. You know?
Well, and the common thread through everything you're describing, Jeremiah, is variable reward. And I was a product manager for a number of years. And one of the things you learn as a product manager about good user design is variable reward, because variable reward excites the dopamine system. This idea of at any given point, I don't quite know what's going to happen. It could be good, it could be bad. Humans are really wired to that. We really like that. And that's a common experience across social media, across gambling, et cetera. And it's to your point, is getting built into more and more of our experiences. And the loot box is a great example. What might seem anodyne, what might seem just like part of a fun, kids-friendly video game, is in fact manipulating them through that use of variable rewards. And this is where we really have to go back to basic research to answer these questions. Maybe, my hunch is, like all interventions in biology, it's super complicated. Probably in moderation, it's fine and it's fun. And probably in excess, it's not good for you, like so many things in our life. It would be good to know what those limits are. It'd be good to inform parents about it. And most importantly, it'd be good to hold corporations liable for it under consumer product safety laws that says, hey, you can't sell a defective bike helmet, and you also can't pitch an app that you know is bad for these kids.
Yeah, well, and especially what you've done seems to be setting up just, look, if the parents say this kid is under 13, the phone is sending you a signal that they're under 13, then don't do inappropriate things to the 13-year-old. Again, like I think it's an important thing that you said that, look, if the parent wants their kid to be getting the full 18 plus experience, there's virtually nothing that's going to stop that. No legislation is really going to be able to stop it entirely.
Can't stop it. That's right. No, it's you can set people up for success and set families up for success. You can hold companies liable. Ultimately, the parent needs to be in the driver's seat on questions like this, I think. And we can give them the tools, but you can't force them.
Well, I know you've got a busy schedule, and I don't want to keep you too long, so I'm going to conclude here by asking the traditional final question that we often ask on this podcast, and that is, where can people go to learn more? If they're interested in just the general topic we're talking about, digital dopamine, kids online. We've mentioned a bunch of stuff. We mentioned Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. I also encourage people to read Chris Hayes' book, The Siren's Call.
Oh.
But what would you encourage people who are just interested in the topic here if they want to learn more? And this could be people who are doing good research. This could be blogs to follow, books to read, anything at all that you think would be a good resource for people who want to follow this topic.
There's a gentleman named Nathaniel Lubin, Lubin, who's written extensively on this subject for years. And I think really laid a lot of the ideological groundwork for approaching this as a temperance issue as opposed to a speech and political economy issue. He wrote a terrific piece. He's written a lot, and he's got a personal website that leads to, I think it's natelubin.org or something like that. He's great. But he wrote a piece in the Atlantic a couple of years ago that I thought was superb, that compared this moment we're in of the incredible rise of social media to the trends of urbanization, particularly in Great Britain in the early 1800s. And the point he was making was, in both instances, what happened was tons of people came together all at once, at a scale and at a speed that was just unprecedented in history. Obviously, in the urbanization events, it was in person. Here, it's virtual. But in both instances, all of these emergent effects started to happen. Infectious disease in the case of cities, and incredible problems with sanitation. And in the case of the cities, they didn't have a germ theory of disease. They didn't know why everyone was getting typhus, and they didn't understand what the problems were. But even before they understood the actual vector of germ theory of disease, they already started to solve the problems. They said, hey, we don't quite know what's going on, but it seems like probably we should be digging more wells and keeping them clean. Like, we don't quite know why, but like, that seems like a good idea. And they started to do a lot of these sanitation and infrastructure policies for urbanization that worked even before they knew why. And I would say we're in a similar moment here, where there is so much that has to be understood about the effects of digital dopamine on the developing brain. There's so much that has to be understood about what happens when 4 billion people start talking to each other all at once simultaneously at scale. But there's some things that we can just do to act right now that I don't think need to await for a 100% answer. Like, probably shouldn't let TikTok just be able to unload on your kids' prefrontal cortex without any supervision. Probably not a great idea.
There's a great story, a man named Jon Snow, and no, not the character from Game of Thrones, but Jon Snow in the 1850s identified that everybody who was getting cholera in London all lived around one particular well. And
That's
even
right.
without a detailed germ theory of disease, they just shut down the well. So maybe that's the analogy here. Maybe TikTok is cholera. In this, no, TikTok is a well that's spreading cholera to our children, and we just need to somehow regulate the well. But I actually think there's more to that analogy that we could dive into. But for now, we'll leave it there. I want to say thank you one more time, Congressman, for coming on the show.
Jeremiah, it's a pleasure.